Good evening, Ms. Magbitang. Today I will be making a video presentation on my literary precis on both The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats and Night by Elie Wiesel. So first, I will be starting off by reading my chosen literary works. The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening Gaia, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out, when a vast image of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight, somewhere in sands of the desert. A shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. So dialogue from the night. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, that turned my life into one long night 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children whose bodies I saw, transformed into smoke under a silent sky. Never shall I forget those flames that consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget the nocturnal silence that deprived me for all eternity of the desire to live. Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes. Never shall I forget those things, even were I condemned to live. As long as God himself, never. The question I will be basing my precis on would be, some writers present a worldview that is pessimistic and disorderly, while others present a world of hope and possibility. How and to what extent do the two texts reflect these? So I will start by reading the full literary precis, and I will go through it sentence by sentence afterwards. So in William Butler Yeats' poem, The Second Coming, he connotes the idea of humanity's loss of control over themselves and their civilizations. This is similar to a passage taken from Elie Wiesel's Night, 1956, on page 34, where the author reveals this idea in Elizur's Never Shall I Forget dialogue. Both characters from Yeats and Wiesel's literary works create an impression of destruction, solitude, and a warlike, devastating setting through the lines, Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes, Wiesel, page 34, and mere anarchy is loosed upon the world from the second coming. Yeats and Wiesel's speakers experience a tremendously challenging time, which, in the second coming, develops the text's overarching theme of chaos and hopelessness, while in Night it shapes the theme of hope and endless possibilities. In the poem The Second Coming, by William Butler Yeats, he develops the poem and its theme through the use of allusion, symbolism, apocalyptic imagery, metaphors, and repetition depicting the theme of terror and hopelessness. On the other hand, the literary work Night by Elie Wiesel uses visual imagery, irony, metaphors, and symbolism to portray the theme of hope throughout the darkness. Yeats and Wiesel's purpose is to make the readers experience unease and sorrow while reading their literary works in order to raise the reader's awareness of the destruction and chaotic state of the world and instill in them a sense of urgency and hope to demand change and get involved in our world. So, moving on to sentence 1. In William Butler Yeats' poem, The Second Coming, he connotes the idea of humanity's loss of control over themselves and their civilizations. The Second Coming by Yeats was composed at an early date in between the 2 world wars, not long after millions of soldiers were slaughtered in the trenches of Europe. The horrific loss of life during World War I casts an outlook shadow that is deeply embedded in the lines of this particular poem. Yeats aimed to write a poem with a larger historical scope that could be held up to the world more universally across multiple generations, and The Second Coming speaks deeply into our political and environmental predicaments today and causes a chilling reading. It is a discussion of what looks like the end of the world scenario, like writing about the apocalypse. The line, Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, expands on the first 2 lines' image of a loss of control. And this is similar to a passage taken from Elie Wiesel's Night, 1956, on page 34, where the author reveals this idea in Elizur's Never Shall I Forget dialogue. And so Night by Weisel, on the other hand, depicts the Holocaust, specifically Weisel's own experiences as a Jewish prisoner in Nazi concentration camps during World War II. The theme of humanity's loss of control over oneself emerges from the horrifying accounts of the Holocaust and the extreme conditions that the prisoners, including Weisel himself, endured. It stands as a powerful remembrance of the horrors of the period and a reminder of humanity's potential when control is stripped from them. Moving on to sentence 2. Both characters from Yeats and Weisel's literary works create an impression of destruction, solitude, and a warlike, devastating setting through the lines, "Never shall I forget those moments that murdered my God and my soul and turned my dreams to ashes." Weisel, 34. Weisel portrays a clearly chaotic worldview through his vivid and dramatic narration, reflecting the unspeakable horrors and dehumanization observed during this dark chapter of history. Despite the sorrow, Weisel tells his story with themes of hope and opportunity, providing glimpses of resilience. Weisel's story emphasizes acts of resistance and disobedience against the camp's brutal conditions. We had not stopped running, if only to show our solidarity, for no particular reason, to defy the cold and the wind, to let the world know that here lived men who still had the strength to defy death. Page 86, Night. Small acts of compassion among prisoners reveal the human spirit's persistence and capacity for generosity in the face of tremendous adversity. One day, when Edek, the capo, was venting his fury, I happened to cross his path. He threw himself on me like a wild beast, beating me in the chest, on my head, throwing me down, and dragging me by my hair. I had only one thought, not to lose him, not to run away, and to remain with my father. Page 62, The Night. And mere anarchy is loose upon the world from the second coming. Yeats and Weisel's speakers experience a tremendously challenging time, which in the second coming develops the text's overarching theme of chaos and hopelessness, while in the night it shapes a theme of hope and endless possibilities. The speaker of the second coming paints a terrifying picture of the end of the world as he talks about how humans are becoming more and more out of control and violent and anarchic. The second coming actually has a relatively simple message. It basically predicts that time is up for humanity and that civilization as we know it is about to be undone. Surreal images fly at the reader thick and fast, creating an unsettling atmosphere that suggests a world on the verge of destruction. This text represents a world that is pessimistic and disorderly, and to the extent that there is no point of return, there is no going back, and there is no way to undo the evil sins of humanity, as it has already caused so much destruction, and there is no more hope, and there is no more possibilities. Moving on to sentence 3. In the poem The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, he develops the poem and its theme through the use of allusion, symbolism, apocalyptic imagery, metaphors, and repetition depicting the theme of terror and hopelessness. So, to elaborate more on this and give further examples, Yeats used a lot of symbols to communicate the idea across the entire poem. For instance, the Gaia represents a spiral or vortex, which stands for a changing and crumbling universe. Yeats also uses powerful apocalyptic imagery, describing a world in anarchy where the blood-dimmed tide is loose and mere anarchy is loose upon the world. And this imagery of devastation, bloodshed, and disorder adds to the heavy feeling of dread and hopelessness. Additionally, he uses repetition, especially in the form of refrains, to underline the theme of despair. He also makes connections to biblical and mythical sources to further the theme of horror. The phrase, "things fall apart, the center cannot hold," is used often to emphasize the sense of collapse and the loss of stability. And the literary work Night by Elie Wiesel, on the other hand, makes use of visual imagery, irony, metaphors, and symbolism to portray the theme of hope throughout darkness. Wiesel describes the terrible and horrifying events of the Holocaust using visual images. The literary text readers may visualize the extent of the anguish and sorrow because of the author's very vivid descriptive language, details in great detail of the detention camps. Wiesel uses metaphors to explain difficult concepts and feelings, and the repeating symbolism in Night itself depicts the tremendous darkness and misery of the Holocaust. So moving on to sentence 4. Yeats and Weisel's purpose is to make the readers experience unease and sorrow while reading their literary works in order to raise the reader's awareness of the destructive and chaotic state of the world and instill in them a sense of urgency and hope to demand change and get involved in our world. The ability to have hope and find redemption is demonstrated by Weisel and Yeats' personal survival and commitment to sharing their story. Yeats wrote The Second Coming to express his deep concerns about the world and encourage reflection among his listeners about the world we live in. Weisel also wants to use his writing to educate and raise awareness about the Holocaust in order to prevent its recurrence. Their dedication to promoting tolerance and supporting human rights reveals their faith in the prospect of a better society, particularly in the wake of such an absolute darkness. Weisel's and Yeats' powerful narrative encourages readers to confront humanity's darkest qualities while also acknowledging the transformational power of hope and the prospect of a more humane world. Night and the Second Coming emphasize the significance of remembering and witnessing the horrors done to them, implying that there is hope for healing and preventing future horrors through awareness and understanding. Thank you for listening.